Welcome back, class. For this lecture, we're going to talk about ancient Greece, beginning with its beginnings and ending with the spread of Hellenistic culture throughout the Mediterranean region, as well as into the modern-day Middle East. Now, when talking about the beginning of Greek civilization, we're going to start here on the island of Crete, starting with what is referred to as the Minoan civilization. The Minoan civilization beginning around, this is an approximate date, we don't quite know, there's no exact time frame for this, for most of the dates I'm going to be talking about in this lecture, but the Minoan civilization beginning around 2600 BC. Minoan civilization being centered here on the island of Crete, just off of mainland Greece. Minoan civilization beginning around 2600 BC, lasting to about 1100 BC. And we say that the Minoan civilization is the beginning of Greek civilization, really because of its influence. There are several examples here, especially in the city of Knossos here. We've excavated, I would encourage you while you're watching this video, if you Google Minoan civilization, or if you Google Knossos Palace, the Knossos is palaces, we have several beautiful, recently uncovered archaeological examples of the palaces that were built by the Minoans. And much of the painting, much of the artwork that was put on the walls is still intact. So you can actually Google that and go look at it. And the Minoan civilization is the beginning of Greek civilization because of this influence of art, of architecture, and perhaps most importantly, of language. It is with the Minoan civilization that we have the beginning of what's referred to as Linear A, which will be the predecessor to modern Greek, the language that is well, to ancient Greek, the language that people in Athens, for example, would have spoken. So from the Minoan civilization, now we start to move here to mainland Greece, to this area here, which is referred to as Peloponnesia, to the Mycenaean civilization. The Mycenaean civilization settling here sort of all along the coast. We have the establishment of small settlements. The rise of the Mycenaean civilization corresponds to the fall of the Minoan civilization. Most historians see a connection there. Most historians believe that the rise of the Mycenaean civilization, that the reason why they are becoming so strong and powerful is basically because they are taking over the Minoans. Now, I forgot to mention when I started talking about the Minoan civilization, obviously Crete here is an island. The Minoan civilization heavily focused on sea trade and on the exchange of goods. This is the Aegean Sea here. All of these little islands had little colonies on them. All this region here, very much dependent upon trade throughout the Mediterranean. And the Minoan civilization begins this trend of these seafaring civilizations in the Mediterranean. For all intensive purposes, is going to serve sort of as an ancient highway. And the Minoans are going to establish connections all throughout the Aegean. You can't see it on this map, but in Egypt, as well as this is right here is what was called Anatolia, modern-day Turkey, and over here we would have Italy. The Minoans start to establish trade links throughout the Mediterranean, which the Mycenaeans slowly pick up on. So Mycenaean culture begins around 1600 BC, will also last to about 1100 BC. The Mycenaean culture, important because it is the first cohesive culture that is found in mainland Greece. It's also during this time, around 1500 BC, that you get the beginning of the writings of these popular Greek myths that you are familiar with, myths about Zeus and Hercules and Athena. Homer begins writing around this time, and you get references to the Minoan civilization. King Minos lives on an island. We now believe that what Homer is referring to is the Minoan civilization. But all of this sort of classical Greek literature, a lot of classical Greek culture, you start to see beginning with the Mycenaean civilization. It is also with the Mycenaean civilization that you get the establishment of Linear B as a language. And Linear B is the direct precursor to ancient Greek, what Homer, for example, would be writing in. So there's a lot of linkage here. You can see also from their close proximity to one another why that would be the case. But the Minoan civilization deeply impacting the Mycenaean civilization. So again, Minoan on Crete, Mycenaean civilization in mainland Greece here in Peloponnesia. Now, beginning around 1100 BC, we have several world events that are sort of happening simultaneously. Now, in this class, I talk about these different civilizations as sort of these distinct entities from one another, and that's just to make things easier for you, so I can break things down into different sections to talk about ancient Greece and ancient Rome and ancient China. But the Mediterranean world especially is deeply linked with each other. So events that might happen over here in the modern day Middle East region would affect civilizations and cultures that would be happening in mainland Greece and also in modern Italy, as we'll see Roman culture as well. So around 1100 BC, there's no one single event, but you have the mass migrations of people into this region. You have basically a destabilizing effect on the area due to climate factors, due to volcanic eruptions, stuff like that. Also due to the migration of people. So around 1100 BC, you see the decline of the Mycenaean civilization. The Mycenaean civilization slowly starts to decline in power. And what starts to happen in Greece is pretty interesting. What starts to happen is the rise of the city-states. The rise of the city-states. And we'll only talk about two of these right now. I'm not quite sure if you can tell on this map. But this right here, ancient Athens and Sparta. Ancient Athens and ancient Sparta, perhaps two of the most important of the Greek city-states. So after the fall, after the gradual decline of the Mycenaean Empire, beginning about 1000 BC, you have the rise of the Greek city-states. The two most important of which, and the two most distinctive of which, is Athens and Sparta. Athens, known primarily for the beginning of Athenian democracy as a form of government, and Sparta, as you know, probably from Hollywood depictions, as being this really austere military society. It's a very strict, law-abiding place in which all the guys have like 18 packs and are constantly running around with their swords and spears, that sort of thing, right? That's probably what you think of when you think of ancient Sparta, thanks to movies like 300 and stuff like that, right? So let's start with Sparta. Sparta conquers the Peloponnesian region here, and the inhabitants here, this is the part that's sort of left out of the movies. So if you, for example, if you've seen the movie 300, you know what I'm talking about, based off of the comic books. The movie 300 depicting what happens during the Persian War. But the Spartans, known not only by us, but to the ancient Athenians and to the ancient Greeks as well, as being this highly structured, highly militaristic society. And just to say a little bit about that, how the society was structured, Sparta was ruled by two kings. They were a monarchy, how it was supposed to be set up, ruled by two kings. One king to serve in Sparta, one king to serve in case the Spartans ever had to go to war. Now we think of the Spartans as a military-based society, and so when we think of that, we think that they were like invading all these other places, but they weren't, because Spartan society was heavily dependent upon slave labor. People who were referred to as the Helots, the people who inhabited this region before the Spartans took over. And so the Spartan society is a slave society in the sense that it was the Helots who were doing most of the work. You have an agricultural-based economy, and this economy was sustained and propagated by slave labor. The Spartans, however, weren't the ones doing the labor. It was the Helots who were doing the labor. So this military society is formed around keeping the slaves in check. So the Spartans had to become militaristic because the Helots far outnumbered the Spartans. So it becomes a daily aspect of the Spartan life to train to fight. Oh, hold on, my computer's going out here. So it becomes a daily aspect of the Spartans to constantly prepare for combat. Who are they preparing for combat against? They're preparing to defend their own land against a Helot uprising, against a slave revolt. So you have this very, very militaristic society develop in which young boys are sent from around, I think it's from ages 5 to 8. To begin with, they're raised by their mothers, and then they're basically sent to live in a military-style barracks in which they're constantly trained for combat. Around age 20, these young men would go and serve and fight in the Spartan military. Again, most of the Spartan military being used to keep down the Helots. And then at around age 30, the Spartan male was permitted to leave the military to build a house, to have a wife, and to start to have kids. And this is what Sparta is known for. That's what it was known in the ancient world. That's what it's known for us. It's this very strict military society. And you have reminiscences of this if somebody says that they're living a very Spartan life. Because the Spartans, in order to keep society in check, also had this sort of distributed sense of wealth in which people were expected to live very simple, to live very rigid, structured lives. So you didn't have like extraordinarily wealthy Spartans running around in like really nice robes or riding on really nice horses. None of that. Everybody basically lived at the same economic level in order to keep society in check. Now, you also have the development of the city of Athens, and Athens, known back then and known to us as being the world's first democracy. The world's first democracy. This was brought about by some political changes that start to happen in the 2nd century BC. And Athenian democracy began with a man named Solon. Athens wasn't always a democracy. In fact, it was started off being ruled by a king. But there, at one point in time, developed this great disparity in wealth between the rich and the poor. And it got so bad that Athenian citizens were having to sell themselves into slavery in order to pay for their land, in order to simply have enough farmland, in order to grow enough food just to get by. And so Solon, who was a politician, saw the problem that was happening, and he developed a political solution to that. The political solution was to forgive the people their debt, to no longer allow Athenians to be sold into slavery. That's not to say that they didn't have slavery. They did. It's just that Athenian citizens couldn't be sold into slavery, right? So to forgive these people's debts, sweeping reform in the sense that Athenians were no longer allowed to be sold into slavery. The rich were able to keep their land, but Solon also established basically a two-house system, very similar structure. Not really. Well, we have a two two-house system today with the House and the Senate. Sort of a similar structure there. But in this case, the council run by the wealthier members of society dictated the law. But everyone had any land-owning male in Athens could play a part in politics. That's the beginning of Athenian democracy, brought about by the reforms of Solon. Now, Athens, Sparta, both start to accumulate power and influence in the region. Another practice that would happen that I forgot to mention is these city-states basically ran themselves. Both the Athenians and the Spartans at this time thought of themselves as Greek. They shared the same culture, they shared the same language, to some extent they shared the same religious practices. They would have been familiar with each other's gods. Now each city kind of had its own special god that they would pray to. But they thought of themselves, loosely speaking, as Greek, even though these city-states operated for the most part independently of each other. But one of the practices that these city-states would do is, in order to help control population, in order to help control resources, they would send members of their city-states, they would send groups of people elsewhere throughout the Mediterranean in order to start new city-states. Now, I'm going to need to change maps here really quick. So, I'm not sure if we could, yeah, it should work. So Athens here and Sparta here, independently running city-states, and they would send their people out to create new city-states all along. This is modern-day Turkey, if you can make that out, modern-day Turkey, all along the Mediterranean. Modern-day Italy here, and you can't see it, but modern-day Spain as well. Even up into the Black Sea region, you have the establishment of all of these independent Greek city-states. Now, what starts to become problematic are the city-states that start to be established here in modern-day Turkey. This region here, what's referred to as Anatolia. The city-states in Anatolia start to become problematic because of the spread of the Persian Empire. The Persian Empire invades Turkey, bumps up against the Greek city-states. Now, even though these city-states are independent, the city-states in Anatolia were founded and started by the city-state of Athens. So these city-states get into conflict with and go to war with Persia, beginning what's referred to as the Persian Wars, the wars that take place between the Persian Empire and the Greek city-states, beginning around 500 BC. So the city-states in Anatolia go to war with Persia, and since they are founded, their mother colony is Athens, they call upon Athens for help. And Athens assists them with their navy, but in assisting the city-states, they go to war with Persia, beginning with the Persian Emperor Darius. Darius goes to war, to begin with, just with Athens. And he conquered, the city-states put up a good fight. Darius decides that he wants to invade mainland Greece, and so he launches a naval attack on the city of Athens. The city of Athens at the time had a fantastic navy, and for the most part are able to fend the Persians off. This is the famous Battle of Marathon, is where the race gets its name from. The Athenian navy defeats the Persian navy, and the Greek soldiers in the city of Athens have to rush down to the harbor. They have to run down to the harbor in order to fend off the invading Persians. They are successful in doing so. But Darius's successor, Xerxes, takes the throne. Xerxes, you might also know from the movie 300. But you might also know Xerxes from the Hebrew Bible as well. He shows up there. Again, all this stuff is really interconnected in interesting ways. So Xerxes takes over the Persian Empire here. He takes over the Persian Empire and decides, at this point, the Persian Empire controls all of Turkey. Xerxes decides that he is going to do what Darius could not, that he is going to invade mainland Greece. But he's not going to make the same mistakes that Darius did. So Xerxes decides that he's going to cross over this bridge here that connects Turkey to Europe, cross over this bridge here, and invade Greece from the north. So this really starts off the Persian Wars. Athens and Sparta have to band together in order to fend off the Persians. This is where we get the Battle of Thermopylae, the battle that's depicted in 300 with the Spartan soldiers, the 300 Spartan soldiers fending off the Persian Empire. The Persians' war lasts for about 50 years. Eventually, the Greeks are able to push the Persians out of the region. They're able to do this by forming what's referred to as the Delian League. The Delian League, basically Athens, city-state of Athens here, starts to collect money and to collect resources because they're able to build the best ships. They have the biggest fleet. And so all of the local city-states kind of bond together in support of Athens to help Athens build this massive fleet. And Athens is able to push the Persians out of the Mediterranean. But as a result, Athens grows increasingly and increasingly powerful, which of course doesn't sit well with Sparta. So Athens, after the Persian War, just after the Persian War, beginning in the end of the 4th century, beginning of the 3rd century BC, Athens and Sparta go to war for control of Greece, what's referred to as the Peloponnesian War. The Peloponnesian War. Athens and Sparta go to war. And the Peloponnesian War is really important because it sets the stage of the guy who we're going to end with. It sets the stage for the rise of Alexander the Great. Now, Alexander the Great comes from this region here, Macedonia. So Athens and Sparta are fighting each other for control of Greece. There's no clear victory here. They basically just fight each other for close to a decade. They're fighting each other, and they're basically just wearing each other down. They're expending a tremendous amount of resources and manpower, and they're really going nowhere. There's no clear victor. No one really has the upper hand. And all this allows for the rise of Macedonia. Now, Macedonia initially, put an M for Macedonia here. Macedonia initially under the control of King Philip II. Alexander the Great's father. Philip dies, Alexander takes over, and the first thing that Alexander wants to do is to take control of mainland Greece, which he is able to do quite easily because, again, the Athenians and the Spartans have worn themselves down. They don't really have a whole lot of resources to put up a fight. So Alexander the Great takes over mainland Greece and decides that he is going to get revenge for the Persian Wars and that he's going to take over what was once the Persian Empire. So Alexander the Great goes to war with Persia, sweeping through the region here, conquering the Persian Empire, moving all the modern-day Middle East as well, sweeping down, taking over what was once the Egyptian Empire, moving all the way, bumping up against what stops him over here is the Mughal Empire in India, but taking over all of this region here, all by the time that he was 33 years old. On his way back from attempting to take over India, Alexander the Great dies. But what's really important about Alexander the Great is not that he was able to conquer all this stuff, and that's no small feat. It's pretty amazing and is absolutely impressive. But what's important about Alexander the Great is that by conquering all of this area here, he spreads Greek culture and he spreads Greek language throughout the Mediterranean and throughout the Middle East. So that way, by the time that we start talking about the Roman Empire, for example, the Romans are able to easily, well, not easily, but the Romans are able to conquer this region and able to maintain control of this region because of the shared language and the shared culture. And it's also the reason why everybody's speaking Greek. Okay? All right, guys, that's all I got for this lecture. If you have any questions, shoot me an email, contact me. I'd be more than happy to get back to you.